Okay, great. Thank you again for joining us for our author chat with Terry Lynn Johnson. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask questions. I'll be reviewing them toward the end of the discussion, and Terry Lynn Johnson will answer. So without further ado, here's a little bio. Terry Lynn Johnson is the author of Ice Dogs, Sled Dogs School, Dog Driven, and the Survivor Diaries series, as well as her upcoming book, Rescue at Lake Wild. She lives in Whitefish Falls, Ontario, where for 10 years she owned a team of 18 Alaskan Huskies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So to start off, I would love to hear a little bit about Rescue at Lake Wild.
So I don't have the actual book yet, but here I printed off. I usually show this to the kids. So Rescue at Lake Wild is about 12-year-old Madison, or Maddie, and she has an affinity for animals. She calls herself an animal whisperer. She has this experience from working with her Nana, who was a wildlife rehabilitator. So Madison and her two friends, Jack and Aaron, and Jack's lab, Lyd, they find and rescue a couple of orphan beaver kits. Maddie decides to bring them home, despite the fact that she's not allowed to bring any more wildlife home. And so the story follows them trying to hide the beaver kits, which, as you can imagine, there's a lot of chaos, as well as they stumble onto the mystery of who is trying to get rid of the town's beaver population. Jack wants to be a conservation officer or game warden, and so they try to solve that mystery to avoid any more beaver kits being orphaned.
Well, that sounds great. Obviously, environmentalism is a huge part of the book. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to include that theme?
Well, to be honest, I didn't actually set out to write a story about environmentalism. But I am a conservation officer, which for 20 years I worked as a conservation officer, which is called a game warden in the States. Here's a picture. This is my younger years, but it's a good picture that shows some of what we do. Sometimes, we have to deal with injured wildlife, and here I am out on the North Channel here. So this is where I work out on the main water of the Lake Huron and Lake Superior. So I have a tendency to write about the outdoors. Before I was a game warden, I was a park warden, backcountry warden in Quetico, which is above the Boundary Waters canoe area. So for 12 years, I was working in the interior. And before that, I was a musher. I had 18 sled dogs. I used to teach dog sledding and outdoor survival at an outdoor school in Thunder Bay. So my writing gravitates towards the outdoors and writing, about the environment, I guess. But because this book specifically is about beavers, and beavers are such an important part of the ecosystem. They make like a huge difference in the ecosystem. And so that's a natural thing, for a tendency for the book to, to have that theme in it. So if kids, anything that I write about the outdoors, my main focus, or it was very important to me, is to have it realism, and I want to have true facts. So if kids come away from the book, with a greater knowledge about beavers and what it takes to look after wildlife, and just like an awareness of the natural environment, then that's great.
Yeah, I agree. That is great. I mean, environmentalism is such a huge issue right now, and I think that a lot of kids are looking to people like Greta Thunberg to know how they can make a difference themselves. So giving them encouraging stories to read related to that, I think, is a really cool thing to do. Stepping back a little bit, I'd love to hear more about why you decided to feature beavers specifically? I don't think that's a middle grade standard animal per se.
You know, mentioned that I worked as a conservation officer, and so throughout my career, I've met a lot of wildlife rehabilitators, and I met Lil Anderson in Kenora, Ontario, who told stories about these beavers, the beaver kits that she looked after, and this was like 15 years ago, but her stories stuck in my mind just because they were so interesting. The beavers, you know, their personalities, and they're a little different from any other animal, especially when you're rehabilitating animals, wildlife. They're very, very social. And so her stories were hilarious. You know, I remember one where the one beaver, they went nuts when they heard the water running, draining out of the pool. And they were trying to stop the water from running. It's just a natural instinct. And the one beaver grabbed the smaller beaver and tried to plug the hole with the other beaver. And so this story, I remembered this story for many years. And so I think I've always wanted to write about beavers. They're just pretty cool animal.
I mean, they sound like definitely characters of the animal world.
Also, I grew up on a lake, and we had a beaver situation when I was growing up with the beavers were damming the channel between our lakes, and my dad was always busting out their dam so that we could get through with our boat. And so he had like this war on beavers. So I grew up with that. You know, he was always trying to save his trees on the property. And I think it's just always been in, you know, in my environment, beavers just fascinated me.
That reminds me of my parents and groundhogs. They definitely can have a war on groundhogs occasionally. So one thing that you specifically shout out in the book is that Maddie wants to meet Jane Goodall, which is really cool, especially for a 12-year-old to be aware of. Can you like explain why you decided to include her a little bit? I mean, the idea of her.
Well, probably just because of the animal whisperer aspect, you know, having the affinity for animals and wanting to speak for the animals. So I use that. It was really important to me, you know, when I talking about wildlife rehabilitators there, I'm specifically talking about the group of people who are licensed under the state or wherever, because every state and place where you live has different regulations, but you have to be licensed, and they're very specific knowledge set of, you know, what animal needs for being able to, you know, to help them. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the people who, you know, it's like a labor of love, who, you know, spend all their time, lots of sleepless nights trying to look after sick and abandoned, you know, orphaned animals. There's not a lot of money involved. You know, oftentimes they're trying to scrounge up money just to try to save them. They usually have a relationship with their local vet who does all kinds of pro bono, you know, donation of his time and work and trying to heal the animals. There are lots of people who are interested in trying to help animals, and they try to save them. And that's completely different. That is not wildlife rehabilitation. That is oftentimes doing more harm than not. This picture that I showed you, I mean, we spent a lot of time. I also, you know, I dealt a lot with bear cubs, which I really wish that I had got some pictures of that. But oftentimes, people will find fawns, baby deer, which their mothers, the does, will leave in tall grass. They will hide them in the grass so that they can go and eat, and they will leave them for hours. But people see it and think that this animal has been abandoned, and they will pick up the fawns and bring them in or try to look after them on their own. Common thing. And so now you're like, put it back because the mom is probably going to come back for it, right? So that is a main thing that people do. Another thing is, you know, when they find rabbit warrens where you know, maybe kids will try to look after all these little baby rabbits that they found. And a common thing to do is to, you know, hold them on your lap because they're just so cute, and you want to pet them because you want to comfort them. And they will just freeze and they will stop and they will sit there in your lap and let you pet them. And so you will think that, oh, you were comforting them and we're making them feel better by petting them, but they're terrified, and they will often die of fright because it's not a natural thing to be petted by a human. So the people,
Wow.
well-meaning, think that they're helping and they're not. You know, feeding them milk, which is really, really bad for their innards. So now not only is the animal lost, now it's got stomach issues. So, you know, I kind of wanted to, in the story, kind of stress that this is not something that most people should do. It's licensed rehabilitators that have knowledge. But on the other hand, it's really fun to imagine being able to look after them. And, you know, it's not something that kids should be doing, but Maddie has special knowledge. And so, you know, it was a fun story to write, imagining that, you know, she could look after the beaver kids.
Yeah, and I think that comes through really well, especially with her grandmother being a wildlife rehabilitator, that she does have some special knowledge in that area as well. And she is a trusted adult that she can go to if she needs to or wants to, which kids don't always want to. So that, I think you did that really well in the book.
Yeah, it's a natural thing for kids to want to, you know, to want to help.
For sure. Switching gears a little bit, I would love to hear more about your work with sled dogs, since you've written quite a few books about them.
Yes.
Can you tell us,
I used to teach dog sledding at an outdoor school. I had 18 sled dogs. And one of the surprising questions that I got asked, a popular question, was, do they all have names? Or how can you tell them all apart? Because I had about 4 dogs that were all white with little black eyes and black noses. But obviously you can tell them apart because Muckluck is always looking to try to escape or get into some kind of chaos. You can see it in his face. And his sister Sitka is always just like, you know, very dainty and too cool for school. You can see that in their expressions because all mushers know their dogs so well that they know, you know, when the last time their toenails were cut. They know who they like to run with in the team. They know where they like to run in the team. They know what they've had for breakfast. They know everything about them. And that is the most important part about dog sledding, is the relationship that a musher has with their dogs. So when I first started writing, which was about dog sledding. And if you're ever going to write something, you should write your passion, I think, because it comes through on the page. So I'm writing about dog sledding. Mostly I was inspired because I wanted to share it with people and explain the joy of the dogs and sledding. And so I wanted to share, you know, when people ask, do they all have names? Well, of course they all have names. And I really wanted to show how important it is to have that bond and the trust, and how, you know, that they know each other. It goes both ways.
That is incredible. I mean, I can see where people may think, it's kind of like a monolith in a way, you know, you have all these dogs tethered to this one sled that are pulling it, so you kind of think of it as one thing. But I mean, if all of Santa's reindeer can have their own names that we've all memorized, then I think that sled dogs can also have their own names and personalities too.
That's one thing that I tell kids for sure, is that you think about your dog and his character traits. And, you know, maybe your friend's dog, a completely different dog. Everyone has their own personalities, right? Some dogs like to sleep a lot. Some dogs never stop. They want to keep going. You know, some dogs bark when people come over. Some dogs hide when people come over. So you've got a whole team of different personalities, and it's the musher's job to get the most out of each dog. So you have to know how to work with them. I had to know that, with Muckluck, I had to like almost scream at him to get him to, what, you're talking to me? But Sitka, I could just whisper. Otherwise, if I raised my voice, I would hurt her feelings and she wouldn't do anything. So, it's you working with the different personalities. So that was, that's kind of what makes dog sledding interesting, is so many personalities, that the team is all made of different age groups and sex, and the male and female is a really good mix, but also young and old. You have the old dogs that know kind of what they're doing. They know how to pace themselves. They know how not to get tangled. The young ones are just like, they can't believe that they're in the team. They're finally in the team. They're so excited and they're jumping around and they just want to run, and they don't know how to pace, and they will just run until they fall over. So, but they're the spark plugs of the team. So, you have the young and old mixed in. And so, a nice mix, dynamic mix of a team is the best thing. It's what makes this sledding interesting.
With such a mix of personalities, I'm not surprised that you've been able to write multiple books about sled dogs, because there's just so much to explore there. Before we move on to our last few questions, I just want to reiterate that if you have any questions, you are welcome to ask them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will answer them. So on that note, can you explain why you love writing middle grade? I mean, I hope you love it, since you've written so many books in the age group. I'd love to hear some more about that.
Yeah, I think that probably because when I was growing up, the books that I love that have stuck with me are the ones that I read when I was in middle grade. The middle school years are very important. They're the years that you're forming opinions and learning about the world, and you're the most curious, and it's just a really fun age. And it's also, I think it suits my personality for, keeping things real, talking about, just the joy of life and living and learning new things and adventure. That I think is the cornerstones of middle grade. And it's a genre that really suits my personality. I don't have a very long attention span. I like short books. I like I like lots of action, and but I think mostly what draws to me is the books that I read when I was growing up really had an impact. Island of the Blue Dolphins, I think, really shaped my love for adventure, reading, and made me question what I could do, what would happen if I was in that situation. So
that is great to hear. I think that everyone who's watching would agree with you about middle grade and the cornerstone experiences of that age group, and that we all appreciate the writing that you've done in that age. And I think one thing that your books do so well is the humor and action and kind of the pacing that just keeps people reading even after they think that they want to stop for the day. We did get one question from an audience member, which is, what has been your favorite book or library conference experience? So kind of your favorite experience around your books and library conferences.
I don't get to very many conferences because I live here in Northern Ontario, Canada, and it's difficult for travel. So I don't get to a lot of those, but I do really love virtual visits. I think probably, that's like right up there on my list of favorite things to do, because the kids, I feed off of their energy. So not to say that I don't like hanging out with librarians, but I really enjoy the conferences that I've been to, but the virtual visits that I have with kids, and I know I used to have also real school visits back in the day. It was just so fun to be able to meet the readers and hear what their own life experiences are. So I think I would say that. school visits.
No, I think that's great. Obviously, being able to interact directly with the people that you're writing, well, the kids that you're writing books for must be a great experience. And I'm sure you get a lot of inspiration from that. Let's finish it off with a fun question, which is, if you could be any animal, which animal would you be?
You know, my husband and I play this game, and he turns his nose up to my answer, but I'm going to stick with my answer. I would say a seagull, probably because from when I was growing up, I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and I've been fascinated by them ever since. Although if I was a seagull, I might not be so philosophical as Jonathan Livingston Seagull. But I think that just because they're so cool, they can do anything. They can walk. Not very many. If you're a duck, you can puddle duck or you can dive really well, but you can't walk very well because your feet are back here. Some of them, have a hard time getting off loons off the lake when they're flying, but seagulls can do everything. They can hang out on the water, they can fly, they can walk easily anywhere, hang out. They're so adaptable. I think they're pretty cool.
That is an excellent and slightly unconventional answer that I'm glad that you told us, because I definitely wouldn't have guessed that. And honestly, it sounds like a great life to be able to, do the lake, do the flying, do the walking. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your new book, Rescue at Lake Wild. This has been a great chat. Do you want to share, is there anywhere that people can find you aside from this chat right now?
I have a website that's got lots of fun games on there, outdoor survival games, some of my own sled dogs, pictures of that, and I talk a little bit about dog sledding. I've got, some cool props on there. You can see, this is actually a real beaver pelt. They're usually about 60 pounds. They're huge. You learn about really cool things like that on my website. So it's terrylynnjohnson.com.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.